TIAA is on a mission. Why? Because 54% of Black Americans don't have enough savings to retire. So in collaboration with big-name artists like Wyclef Jean, TIAA released Paper Right, new music inspiring a new financial future. With 100% of streaming sales going to a nonprofit that teaches students how to invest. Stream Paper Right now and help close the gap.
Oh, hello there. I didn't see you come in. I'm Shane O'Hare of the Geekscape Games Podcast, the #1 video game podcast on the Geekscape.network. Join myself, Derek Krenevelt, and a guest every fortnight as we discuss video game news, video game reviews, and dissections. That's Geekscape Games every 2 weeks on Geekscape.net.
I visit Mr. Frump in the hospital. I see him most every day. And when I see Mr. Frump in his iron lung, this is what I hear him say.
All right, Matt. Everybody who's been listening to us week to week, we've already revealed this last week. Let's just get this out of the way. We're both putting this as our number 2 for this album as far as original songs
I think it
go.
has to be. I don't know where else it could possibly. I mean, oh god, this is a great track.
This is one of the Weird Al songs that I legitimately remember the very first time I heard it. Like, this was one that left an instant impression on me, and I feel like it's probably the same for you.
It is, and because it was a later one. Again, I did not hear this. It took a few years of being a fan before this track was shown to me.
Yes. What is your memory of this song?
My memory was that somebody I think I heard about it because Al mentioned it in some interview. I had heard him talking about the fact that he had done this song that utilized the air valve on the accordion.
Yep.
As a musical instrument of itself. And I heard him say that, and I was like, I don't know what song he's talking about. And then I went back and looked, and, again, I was like a compilation, noob to so much of his stuff, and went back and found this record and listened to the track. To be honest, I probably downloaded the song on Napster when I heard that. That seems like the time period for me when that would have happened. But I remember sitting and listening to it on the computer and being so, like, legitimately laugh out loud tickled by this track, and just like listening to it in my parents' computer room with my headphones on and being like, this is so weird and silly and wonderful.
So for the people who haven't heard the song is about Al hanging out with a man named Mr. Frump, who is currently in an iron lung. And each verse kind of ends with him leading into what Mr. Frump has to say about something. And instead of there being any lyrics, it's just the sound of air coming out of the accordion valves, which sounds like an iron lung running.
It's hard to describe this just from a quick musical perspective. The way that the accordion works is that if you're not pressing down a key to make a note, you can't really squeeze it open or shut because it depends on the air passing through when you push down a key. So if you have it expanded and you need to shut it without playing notes, it has a small valve on your right hand, I guess it would be, and you can press that valve down and it'll just push air through the bellows, I guess is the term, and that way you can shut it. But when it pushes the air through, it's just like a like that kind of a sound. He used it to simulate the iron lung. I think in the interview I heard him point out, he's like, as best he can tell, it's the first and only time anyone has ever used the air valve as an instrument of its own. That's probably true.
Yeah, I would say I would vote that that's most likely accurate.
Yeah.
I would say that this legitimately is probably the most mean-spirited song on the entire record, but it's also really funny.
It's really, really funny. It's funny because, again, we're talking about like Al's take on this. I have heard that he has mixed feelings about this track because it is kind of mean-spirited, but he has performed it live as recently as a couple years ago. He does do this song, so it can't be, if he has concerns about some of the other tracks on this record, which we've assumed he does, I'll Be Mellow When I'm Dead and Such a Groovy Guy and Buckingham Blues. This one, I guess, is at least somewhat palatable for him to continue to sing at this point in his life.
Yeah, and I like that it's such a sparse recording. It's just him with his accordion, and you got John like kind of tapping on the side of the snare with the sticks to have like a tap dancey type sound to it. But that's it. So my first time hearing this song, I am big on to, if I really like an artist, I want to own as much of the physical catalog as possible.
Totally.
And I'll get to a point where it's like I won't even download or listen to anything until I want to find that album in the wild and hear it for the first time, like on the vinyl or on the CD or whatever.
Yeah.
So this was one of the last Weird Al records that I was able to put into my CD collection. I have every single release of his on CD at this point, except for one that we'll talk about that's like absolutely impossible to find. Matt had a chance to have it on vinyl. He said no.
I blew it.
I remember I was driving in my car. It was probably post-college, but I was still early 20s-ish. And I bought the album, and I'm driving around listening to it. And this came on, and I remember laughing uncontrollably.
Yeah.
Like, I knew exactly what I was hearing because I grew up in a family that had a lot of Dixieland and polka music, so I knew what the sound of the accordion air valve sounded like. And I realized immediately what this song was, and it was so demented, but so very, very funny. It's
so funny.
We've talked about a lot of mean songs. I think this is the meanest.
It's interesting because
song.
Yeah, I mean, it's super dark. I feel like it doesn't feel as mean to me because again, this so much of this is just like how it feels.
Yeah,
because this song feels less personal. I was talking in Such a Groovy Guy about how a lot of these songs feel very personal.
Yeah, no, there is no real Mr. Frump. I feel like he would not be playing this song if he actually knew a Mr. Frump that he wrote this song about.
No way. No way. So this just feels like a morbid premise that he's come up with and cooked up to execute. So it doesn't feel as mean to me as some of those other songs, but it's very dark. And it is like, I mean, the entire conceit of the song is he is making fun of a person with a life debilitating condition who dies in the song.
Yeah, I was going to say he dies at the end of the song.
Yeah.
Where it gets to where Mr. Frump's supposed to say something and nothing.
Frump had to say.
And nothing happens.
And then they just say amen.
And it just ends with his amen. Which is probably, aside from the gag of the valve itself, like that has got to be like the funniest line of the song. It's just the very church-like amen, like to end it is just so ridiculous. You know, I also saw, like, I did a little bit of research on this one because I love this so much. This is a very old, according to something I saw online, he says he wrote this when he was 17.
And I think that this screams 17-year-old.
It does. It does absolutely scream 17. And it screams, you know, we see it over and over again, but it's these little glimpses of just how, I feel like he has kind of two senses of humor in a way where it's like he has like songs that he writes that are intentionally going for like a mass appeal type of comedy where he knows that people will relate to it and it's just like broad stuff and that people are going to latch onto and enjoy. And then he lets himself have a few moments where he really dives into what I think he might find more funny himself, which is this sort of a thing.
And I also, I do want to also talk about how this is, I mean, I don't think we're going to do a list of his best closers, but this is one of his best closers for sure.
He is really good with album closers because this is a fantastic closer, but as in 3D looms,
yeah,
holy cow, does that have a great closer?
That has a great closer. I mean, I just looked at a list of his, I actually think the only time that I don't like his closers is when he does a polka closer. Even if it feels like it makes sense for the polka to be the closer, in my brain it's like, no, the polka always has to be the end of side A. Like that is the spot that it belongs.
I agree. End with the polka feels somewhat anticlimactic, but
outside that, I mean, I'm like looking at he's also good at, well, we'll get into in 3Ds, but in general, a lot of his closers are like this, much more stripped down.
yes.
Just him with a accordion in this one, a lot of him with acoustic guitar closers that you see until you get to Albuquerque, and then it flips this switch where it's like, okay, well now the closer is like
the most
the
epic
giant
closer
epic
in the
thing.
world. Yeah, exactly.
Like it is like
Yeah.
this immediate, like, I actually would say even Bad Hair Day, I guess, was the start of like, okay, we're going to go in a completely different angle after like the first couple albums having way more of a stripped down ending, getting into this like, okay, now this is like a cinematic performance
Absolutely.
to send you home.
The end of your record is basically a whole other record.
Yeah, oh, for sure. Exactly. But yeah, I definitely, it's tough because it's one of those songs where it's like, this is another one in a similar vein to Gotta Boogie, though, where I'm like, there isn't a whole lot to say. It's a short song.
It's
like
very short.
It's like a minute 30 or something like that.
Yeah, it's under 2 minutes.
Yeah, it's definitely under 2 minutes. And, you know, there's not a lot to break down from a musical standpoint. But I guess the question that I have with this is I wouldn't even know, throughout most of this record, there's been a lot of like, okay, this is a parody of like this genre. I don't even know what this would like, what is this music?
Yeah, I don't know. It's a great question because I remember going down a rabbit hole years ago. I felt in my mind this is like a point in time where the internet was really starting to, you realize like, wow, the internet has all of the information in the world.
Yeah.
And I went down a rabbit hole where I remembered someone had a website, some sort of a fan community that basically tried to attribute some sort of a style parody to every original song of his. To be like, what is he referencing the most on this track? And some of them felt like such a reach to me. And I was just like, you know, I think in some cases he just came up with a thing that he thought was interesting. And to me, this is a absolute obvious example of that. I don't know what, maybe there is some obvious reference here or some obscure reference here that I'm not seeing in the way that this song is done. But
I'm just wondering if there was like, the only thing I could compare this to, and it wouldn't even be, I wouldn't even say it's a genre of music, is like, this is a vaudeville song.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? Like, it's like, it's something that in the 1930s, you could go to some tent and see a person playing an accordion while someone tap danced. Like, that's like the vibe that I get listening to the song.
Totally.
Is that.
And you get the sense that a lot of these songs, you know, he probably wrote and arranged in a time in his life where he would have never imagined that he would have a backing band to be with him on these songs. Like, they are clearly, and as we go back through the list, like, obviously Another One Rides the Bus, My Bologna, even Gotta Boogie, like, so many of them are built in a way where you could tell he's like, if I'm alone with an accordion and a microphone, I can do this song.
Yes.
And
And
he must have had that in his mind constantly as he was making this record.
And I think that that's like one of those things where you look at, you know, Weird Al is strangely, this is going to be the only time anyone ever compares him to this, but like, Weird Al reminds me of Bright Eyes in the sense of like, you can think of Bright Eyes as a solo project by Conor Oberst. But I remember he did his solo album one time, and when asked why he was doing a solo album, he was like, because too many people aren't recognizing that my bassist and drummer are also part of Bright Eyes.
Yeah.
And I think that there's that element of like, he is Al Yankovic. Weird Al Yankovic is a legitimate band that has had a consistent membership for a very long
you're
time.
absolutely right. And moving forward from this record, I think that's absolutely true. But this album, and because these songs, a lot of them existed from before, he didn't know. It wasn't a band. It was a kid at home with an accordion coming up with these weird ideas. And this album is like, I totally believe that some of this stuff, like I'll Be Mellow When I'm Dead and Checks in the Mail, those were, I would bet anything, written knowing he was going to have more instrumentation.
Yeah.
But a lot of this stuff clearly was not. And this is a great example of just like, you know, at the time he was just like, well, what can I do with what I've got? And songs like this just come from necessity.
So I'm curious, and maybe I'm going to check the Wikipedia page. I know that John Schwartz was like guy he met in college.
Yeah.
Basically. How did Jim and Jay and Steve come together in this group?
It's a good question. I know that, or I shouldn't, I'm pretty sure that Steve J brought on Jim West.
Okay.
How Steve J met Al, I am not sure of.
Just check. I just Googled it. Jay auditioned after answering an ad in the newspaper.
That's amazing.
So the idea that in 1982, this guy answers a newspaper ad and is just, from that point on, he is the guy. And then
it's
like,
funny.
here's
I just
my buddy
looked it up.
Jim.
Yeah, and Jim West he auditioned to be in Al's band after being introduced by Steve J in 1983.
Yeah.
That's. I mean, this is so fun to think about. Imagine being Steve J and seeing an ad in the newspaper for like, oh, I'm looking for a bass player. You respond to the ad. It's this. It's these songs. This guy doing My Bologna instead of My Sharona. And to tell him that this is going to be his gig for 40 years, that is just beyond belief, man.
Did you know, this is wild. Now I'm looking at Jim West's Wikipedia page. Do you know that he has released countless new age albums and has gotten 2 Grammy nominations for them?
I did know that. I didn't get to do this, unfortunately, but 2 of my closest friends who are also, huge Al fans, when he was doing the Vanity tour, they went to go see him. Oddly enough, I live in New York City, but I was not able to go to the show that he played in New York City. I had to go see him out on Long Island. Mm-hmm. But they went to the New York City show, and after the show at the Beacon Theater, I think it was, there was an after party type show at, I want to say it was Joe's Pub down in like Village area.
Okay.
And it was Steve J and Jim West playing their original music, which is all like Hawaiian inspired, basically all instrumental, kind of new age, kind of traditional Hawaiian music.
So weird.
And it was so funny because it was like they went to see this show. They were like, oh, why not? And it was a super late night where they were like just sitting in this room of people, like a large number of people in this crowd are obviously Al fans who are like, oh, let's go check out the band at the after party. But the music is so could not be more different than the sort of stuff they do with Al, and also just deadly serious, like original instrumental music. And they were like, it was super fun. They're obviously amazing musicians, but it was a striking change in tone.
All right. Well, usually at this point of the episode, when we get to the end of an album, we will be ranking it, but we got nothing to rank it up against. So now, congratulations, self-titled. You're at the number 1 slot for both of us.
Yeah, this album is the best album we've talked about so far. So congratulations.
At this point in time, I have not re-listened to In 3D.
Okay. I have not either.
But if I was pulling from just looking at that track list and my memories of how I feel about some of those songs, there's a chance I might rank this above In 3D.
Ooh, that's so interesting.
We'll see when I revisit these songs.
We're going into it fresh because I have not heard In 3D in a while.
Yeah.
I predict that I am going to prefer In 3D. In my mind, In 3D ranks among my favorite Al records, but it's been a while.
I just think that in my head, I'm thinking I think that he's still getting his footing. I can tell you right now that I know that I just know from how often I listen to it and how much I love it that the next album, when we get into Dare to Be Stupid, it's not even a competition for me. That is top tier to me. But In 3D is it's moving towards where that top tier is, but it's lacking so much of the strangeness that we just went through that I'm wondering if re-listening to it, it's going to feel so tame that it
probably
loses
will
that
feel,
interest to me.
You're probably right about that. I mean, by comparison, I think it has to feel tame because how could it
there will never be
compare?
another Weird Al album that sounds like this first album.
Yeah.
It is.
No, that is true. That is very, very true.
If you've avoided this album because everybody, including Al, has told you it's the worst album, it is worth diving into because
Absolutely.
It is
I mean, there's no
unreal.
question about that. Yeah, no. If you are not familiar, if somehow you've gotten to this episode of our podcast and you are not super familiar with this album of his, man, no, it's worth your time. There are hits and misses, but I mean, of course there are. There's hits and misses across his whole catalog, but it really does. No record of his sounds like this.
Nope. And we will listen to next week. We'll do one track that did not make the cut.
Oh, yes.
Before we dive into In 3D.
Yes.
Find Yourself, the new single from Punchline, is out now.
All lead or I'll follow, I just wanna get there. If anyone knows better, then please show us out of here. I'm not saying I know, but I see the next step. If that's all we can get, then it's better than zip. This is no joke, man, this is a fight. Trying to find yourself in the right place, the right time. Where most
Listen to Punchline's Find Yourself on Apple Music, Spotify, and everywhere you stream music.
You're listening to the Geekscape Network. You're listening to the Geekscape Network.